You know, April, I've been trying to build a booty, and it's just not working.
Well, what have you been doing?
Pretty much everything that the Instagram models do. You know, like Paige Hathaway and Michelle Lewin, all the booty kickbacks and the donkey kicks and glute bridges.
Well, have you tried hinging?
What's that?
Boy, do I have so much to teach you.
What's going on, guys? It's David. We're here with Smart Fitness, and I've got a new training partner today, and it is April, a girl from school. We're gonna let her introduce herself, and then we're gonna get into the mechanics of hinging.
My name's April. I went to school with David to do my kinesiology degree, so we're here now to demonstrate a hinge for you guys.
All right, guys, so obviously we need to understand why hinging is important in and of itself before you can understand how to hinge.
Well, guys, we need to recognize that if you aren't hinging or hinging at all or properly, then you might not be using your posterior chain properly.
Yeah, if you're not hinging properly, you're basically asking yourself for some sort of musculoskeletal dysfunction, low back pain, or just general movement incompetencies. So the first thing we need to recognize when hinging is that it is a posterior chain movement, meaning that it's coming from your glutes, your hamstrings, your low back, your erectors, a little bit of your lats from stabilizing. And as a result of that, it's going to increase cross-sectional area and lead to a larger diversity and hypertrophy of the posterior chain. Let's get into how to hinge. All right, guys, so a hinge requires total control of your glutes and to a certain extent your hamstrings. But for the purpose of what we're going through here, we're going for maximal glute control. So as a result, a glute bridge is a good starting point to see where somebody is at for hip extension. So we're gonna have April perform a glute bridge, and we're just gonna talk about sensations that you might see and feel throughout. So on your glute bridge, when you set up for it, you wanna make sure that as you're thrusting up, hitting full hip extension, you're not having the hamstrings take over and doing the majority of the work. So a good test to see if you're doing that is have somebody put their hands underneath your legs. So as you thrust up, you're able to see if your hamstrings are becoming super tight and very stiff, or they're just maintaining their usual rigidity, and the majority of the movement is coming from your glutes. So have you perform another glute bridge for me. So as she's hitting full hip extension here, you can see that she's lined up with her knees, hips, and shoulders, but her hamstrings are pretty loose, which means she's got very adequate glute control. So from a glute bridge, you can progress somebody into pure hip extension movements such as an RDL. That is next on the docket. All right, guys, so like I was alluding to earlier, we're gonna get into basic hip extension movements, and that would be a starting point for your RDL. So April's gonna go ahead and perform our RDL. I'm not gonna give her any corrections on the first 2 reps, and then we'll kind of go through and provide general corrections. So April, whenever you're ready. So as a general starting point, you want to make sure that the bar is staying close to your body the entire time and not traveling forward. So the first thing we're going to have April do is keep the bar close to her legs throughout the entire movement. And as she's hinging back, she's going to think hips and knees both travel back at the exact same time. Good. And then as she feels that stretch in her hamstrings, she's going to pull up and squeeze the bum as hard as she can to travel forward. So essentially, the hips going from a posterior position all the way forward is what hip extension is. The next thing you want to pay attention to is how you're actually bracing. So you want to make sure that the rib cage and pelvis stay close together and they're not extending and getting further apart as you're coming down. They're going to stay in that same neutral position. So we're going to think as April comes down, here stays in the exact same position. So we'll have her go into that hinge pattern again. And if you pay attention to it, there really isn't any movement in terms of what's going on in her ribs and pelvic relation. From there, we're going to go into a little bit more advanced variations of hip extension, including the kettlebell swing and the deadlift in and of itself.
So guys, we have David here with the kettlebell, which is a more explosive and another variation of an RDL. So the deadlift is another form of hip extension due to the second pull.
All right guys, so we've gone over 3 pretty basic variations of hip extension and pretty common variations of hip extension. But you also need to keep in mind that hip extension does occur during the squat due to the finishing point of your squat. So if you take a look at my body weight squat here, as I'm coming down, I'm going into hip flexion, and as I come up, there is hip extension to bring the hips forward. The same premise applies when you're doing an actual hip thrust. So for you Fitspo girls out there, hip thrusts are definitely a pure hip extension based movement with load due to the weight being on the hip flexor complex in and of itself. So in summation, if you are not doing hip extension, do it. If you're doing hip extension wrong, improve it. Watch this video. Take note of how we went about a test to make sure that you're actually performing hip extension as opposed to just moving from a position where your hips are back and then bringing them forward. You want to make sure that you are actively squeezing and contracting your bum to bring it all the way forward. The glute max is a massive muscle. Take full advantage of that. At the same time, you want to make sure that you're not fully externally rotating from the hips because that takes away from the glute max's abilities and as a result recruits the glute minimus. So for example, if I am hinging and I'm performing an RDL, but as I'm coming down, my knees are traveling out, that puts a lot of tension and strain on my glute medius and removes a lot of the tension on the glute max. And as a result, it reduces torque, power availability, and quite frankly, can increase your chances of injury. So, I don't want to keep you guys here any longer. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm probably going to do another more in-depth version of hinging, breaking down each of these individual movements, where they would have their place, as well as how to do them. But long story short, ladies and gentlemen, make sure that the hips are traveling from a position of flexion all the way into extension. So backwards to forwards, squeezing that bum. Ladies and gentlemen, stay strong. We'll see you in the next video. Thank you, April. You've been great. We hope to see you out here again. Oh, he's still filming.